My hair was yanked backward with sudden force, the chair legs scraping violently against the wooden floor, and the sharp scent of birthday candle wax mixed instantly with the burning sting of spicy garlic sauce. Travis tightened his grip on my hair, pulling my head hard as his lips brushed my ear with a low, threatening murmur to come on. Judith clapped her hands together across the table, her voice cutting through the air as she cheered that this was how a woman was supposed to learn her place. The entire table froze for a single beat, but several phones were already raised from the shadows. My muscles tensed on autopilot, and for a fraction of a second, I had every opening I needed to snap his wrist or flip him over the table. I forced myself not to move. I locked my wrists against the edge of the table to suppress the defensive reflexes 16 years in the army had sharpened in me. When Travis finally let go to assume the posture of a victimized husband, I shoved my chair back, stepped 2 paces away, and told him clearly never to touch me again. Travis shifted his mask instantly, rubbing his wrist as though I had hurt him and shouting that I had lunged at him first. Judith joined in immediately, weeping loudly that my sudden rage was terrifying the whole family. I did not argue with them, because I saw Claire holding her phone while refusing to meet my eyes, while Richard kept his gaze fixed entirely on his plate. Elena, the restaurant manager, hurried over to lead me back to her private office, recording the staff names and securing the security footage before anyone could interfere. The local police arrived shortly after, taking brief statements and documenting the bruises and muscle strain across my scalp and neck. I refused to return home with Travis, driving instead to a friend's apartment without involving anyone from my military unit. None of them knew that 5 weeks before this birthday dinner, I had already met with a divorce attorney to plan an orderly exit for the sake of my daughter Avery. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from Elena letting me know that the phone left on the table had been recording for nearly a full minute before Travis touched me, and he had glanced directly at the lens twice. The quiet of the restaurant office was a stark contrast to the shouting match left behind in the main dining room. Elena poured a small cup of water from a plastic pitcher, sliding it across the laminate countertop toward me. My hands were steady, a habit of 16 years spent handling logistics and heavy equipment under pressure, but my scalp burned where the roots had been strained. "Major Cole," Elena said, her voice dropping to a low professional register that brooked no argument. "I have secured the exterior drive. The local police will need a formal request to pull the complete logs, but I have already locked the system so the rolling overwrite cannot touch the last 2 hours. I looked at her, taking in the neat black vest and the silver manager pin on her lapel. She was 40-something, perhaps a bit older, with sharp eyes that missed nothing in a room full of difficult diners. "Thank you, Elena," I said, my voice level. "Did you see where the phone came from?" She crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the filing cabinet behind her. It was positioned near the center arrangement of artificial hydrangeas. The youngest sister, Claire, set it down about a minute before the cake arrived. She propped it against a glass vase. At the time, I thought she was just trying to get a cute video of the candles. But after watching the angle from the ceiling dome, it was pointed straight at your chair. Not the cake. You. The pieces clicked into place with cold precision. Travis had not reacted in the heat of a moment. He had positioned the narrative before the first slice of cake was even cut. We stayed in the office for another 20 minutes, while a patrol officer named Miller took my statement. Officer Miller was young, carrying the hesitant posture of someone trying very hard to look authoritative in a noisy suburban district. He asked routine questions, nodding as I gave him my name, rank, and the address of my permanent residence, though I made it clear I would not be returning to that house tonight. When Officer Miller walked back out to speak with Travis and Judith, I could hear fragments of their voices drifting through the frosted glass of the office door. Judith was performing grief, her voice swelling with theatrical sorrow about my difficult temperament and the unbearable stress I brought into her son's home. Travis chimed in with softer tones, portraying himself as the long-suffering spouse who only wanted peace. They were laying down track. Every word was chosen to frame an aggressive military wife as an unpredictable liability, and to reduce a physical assault into a domestic squabble where both parties were allegedly at fault. Officer Miller returned a few moments later, looking mildly exhausted. He held a small plastic notepad, tapping his pen against the spiral binding. "Major Cole, your husband claims you stood up and raised your hand first, and he was merely restraining you to prevent a scene," Miller said, keeping his eyes down at the page. His mother corroborates that version. "Since there are no visible lacerations, and you are declining an ambulance transport, this currently logs as a domestic disturbance involving unwanted physical contact." "I did not raise my hand, officer," I said, looking straight into his eyes. "Check the restaurant manager's backup logs and look for the phone propped by the center vase." It was recording before he touched me. Miller blinked, his pen halting on the paper. He glanced over at Elena, who simply nodded once. "The manager has already flagged the digital files for preservation," Elena added, her tone crisp. "We will hand them over to your department as soon as a formal subpoena or evidence request is filed tomorrow morning." Miller cleared his throat, suddenly looking much less inclined to write off the incident as a simple family disagreement. He jotted down a reference number on a torn slip of paper and handed it to me. "File this with the precinct tomorrow morning, Major," Miller said. "If there is unedited footage showing premeditation, that changes the filing parameters significantly." I thanked him and walked out through the kitchen exit to avoid running into Judith's theatrical weeping in the lobby. The night air of Tacoma was sharp and smelled faintly of damp pine and exhaust from the nearby highway corridor leading toward the Joint Base. My car sat in the corner of the paved lot, a silver sedan that had carried me through 3 different duty stations and countless early morning commutes. My phone chimed twice as I set it on the passenger seat. The first message was from Travis. It was short, designed to test my boundaries. "Megan, please come home. Mom is beside herself, and Avery is going to wake up asking where you are. Let us talk this out like adults." I did not reply. I shifted the car into drive and pulled out onto the boulevard, heading north toward the modest apartment complex where my friend Sarah lived. Sarah was a former logistics captain who had transitioned out 2 years prior to work as a civilian contractor. She knew how I lived, she knew how to keep a secure perimeter, and most importantly, she knew when to ask questions and when to simply hand someone a cup of black coffee and a locked door. The second message arrived before I had even cleared the second stoplight. This one was from Judith. "You have always resented this family's closeness, Megan. Do not destroy your daughter's life because you cannot control your temper." I stared at the glowing screen for a fraction of a second before turning the phone face down on the center console. They still thought they were dealing with someone who would scream back. They still thought that by shouting loud enough and pointing enough fingers, they could make the reality of a yanked head of hair and a bruised scalp disappear into the background noise of a messy marriage. They did not understand that my 16 years in uniform had taught me one fundamental law above all others: never engage an enemy on the terrain they have chosen for you. When I reached Sarah's apartment building, the lights in her second-floor window were already glowing with a soft, warm amber. I parked near the end of the row under the branches of an oak tree, cut the engine, and sat in the dark cabin for a moment. My fingers brushed against the back of my neck, tracing the sore muscles just below my hairline where Travis's fingers had dug in. The pain was real. The humiliation was real. But neither of those things was going to guide my next move. 5 weeks ago, sitting across from Dana Brooks in a quiet downtown law office filled with heavy oak furniture and towering stacks of case files, I had learned the most important lesson of my adult life. Dana had looked at me over her reading glasses, her expression entirely free of judgment or pity. "Major Cole," Dana had said then, "people like your husband rely on your sense of honor to trap you. They expect you to protect the family name, to absorb the blow, to keep the peace because making a scene goes against your training. When you finally break, they capture that 1 second of reaction and use it to bury you. Do not give them the reaction. Give them the timeline. I stepped out of the car, locking the doors with a solid beep, and walked up the exterior metal staircase towards Sarah's door. My boots clicked against the steps with steady, measured rhythms. Sarah opened the door before I could even raise my hand to knock. She took one look at my face, my rigid posture, and the slight stiffness in my neck, and she stepped aside without a word, pulling me into the warmth of her hallway. "Coffee is on," Sarah said quietly, closing the door and throwing the deadbolt. "Tell me how many copies of the footage we need to secure by morning." I took off my jacket, hung it neatly over the back of a wooden chair, and sat down at her kitchen table. The battle was no longer about a bad marriage or a ruined birthday dinner. It was about a file, a security camera, and a man who had looked directly into a hidden lens because he believed he was already holding all the cards. The morning light cut through Sarah's vertical blinds in sharp, yellow stripes that reminded me far too much of the security gates at the base. I sat at the small laminate kitchen table with a cold cup of black coffee, staring at the screen of my laptop while my phone hummed silently against the wood. 4 days had passed since the birthday dinner at the restaurant. 4 days of calculated silence, punctuated only by the hum of incoming digital threats and frantic voicemails. Dana Brooks had made herself entirely clear during our morning briefing over a secure line, reminding me that while I could express my perspective to the local authorities, the decision to press formal charges against Travis belonged to the state prosecutor rather than my personal wishes. "Major Cole, do not answer any direct calls from your husband or his mother," Dana said, her voice crisp and unyielding through the speaker. "Travis's attorney has already filed notice that they intend to seek temporary orders regarding custody of Avery. They are trying to provoke a response, Megan. Do not give them one." I lowered my phone, my fingers brushing against the edge of the table where I had spent the last 96 hours organizing every financial document, text export, and medical record into meticulous digital folders. I had already secured a temporary protective order through the county court, ensuring that Avery remained under my primary care while the initial evaluation was processed. I had sat down with my 12-year-old daughter the previous evening, keeping my voice level and reassuring, as I explained that her father and I were having serious adult disagreements, carefully avoiding any mention of the physical violence or the cameras that had captured it. Avery had looked at me with the same observant gray eyes she inherited from her father, asking if she was going to have to change schools. I had promised her that her life would remain entirely stable, even as I knew the ground beneath us was already shifting. The illusion of peace shattered before noon when my phone screen flashed with a rapid succession of text messages from Travis. The words scrolled across the glass in a desperate, pleading stream that felt entirely rehearsed. "You know I would never hurt you, Megan," the first message read, followed immediately by another demanding that I call the precinct and tell them I had simply been startled by a sudden movement. I stared at the glowing notifications, feeling that cold, heavy pressure settle behind my ribs. The anger was a familiar weight, born from 16 years of keeping score in a marriage built on quiet sabotage. Without thinking through the strategic implications, my fingers flew across the keyboard in a sharp, unfiltered response. "You wanted me to hit you back," I typed out, my jaw aching from grinding my teeth. "You should be grateful I did not." The screen went dark for 5 seconds before Dana's number flashed on the display. "Megan," Dana said without greeting, her tone dropping into a dangerous chill. "Tell me you did not just send what I think you sent." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool surface of my hand. "I lost my temper for 30 seconds, Dana." I fell right into his trap. "He will take that single message, strip away every text that came before it, and wave it in front of a family court judge as proof that you threatened physical retaliation," Dana warned, her words cutting through my regret like a scalpel. "He wants to frame you as the volatile military wife who poses a danger to her own family You gave him an anchor, Megan. Now we have to pull it up before he drags us both under. I didn't argue. I didn't make excuses about the exhaustion or the sheer humiliation of standing in that dining room while Judith cheered for my degradation. I simply deleted the messaging app from my active screen, acknowledging my mistake with the cold discipline of an officer who had just lost a ridgeline because of a careless reconnaissance error. By the fourth afternoon, the tactics shifted entirely from digital intimidation to desperate supplication. The phone on the kitchen counter began to ring from unknown numbers, and when I finally let one roll to voicemail, Judith's theatrical weeping filled the small apartment. Her voice shook with manufactured devastation, lamenting that Avery needed her father, that Travis was on the verge of losing his civilian management position at the insurance firm, and that an entire family shouldn't be torn apart over a single second of high tension. "Why won't you just talk to us, Megan?" Judith wept into the speaker, her pitch rising into that familiar accusatory whine that had poisoned every holiday dinner for over a decade. We only ever wanted what was best for the household. I listened to the recording once, then forwarded the audio file directly to Dana's encrypted email before blocking the number. Judith still believed she could manage the narrative through sheer volume and emotional manipulation, treating a criminal assault as if it were a minor etiquette violation at a country club mixer. The real pressure arrived an hour later, when Travis and Judith attempted an end run through formal legal channels, dispatching their private attorney to offer a conditional truce. The terms were delivered through a formal letter dropped at Dana's office. If I would sign a joint declaration stating that the restaurant incident was nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding between spouses, and if I agreed not to oppose the dissolution of the temporary protective order, Travis would graciously permit me to remain in the family home with Avery and would hold off on contesting my primary custody request for the time being. Dana called me into her office to review the document paragraph by paragraph, her pencil tapping rhythmically against the mahogany desk. "Notice what they are really doing here, Megan," Dana said, looking up over her tortoiseshell frames. "They are offering you your own house back, as if it were a gift, but look at the timeline. They introduced the custody conditions before we even filed our formal response. Travis isn't just trying to patch up a marriage. He is reacting to something he knows we are about to uncover." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed against the blotter. It was an incoming call from Elena at the restaurant, her voice sounding tight and strained through the speakerphone. "Major Cole," Elena said without preamble, "I thought you should know that about 20 minutes ago an older woman identifying herself as Judith Cole came into the dining room demanding to speak with our shift supervisor. She asked if our internal security backups were stored on a local hard drive or a cloud server, and she specifically wanted to know if a preliminary digital copy could accidentally be misplaced before the police department processed their formal evidence subpoena." "Did your staff engage with her, Elena?" I asked, my grip tightening around the edge of the desk. "No," Elena replied firmly. "My shift manager told her all digital files were locked and copied so the original footage could not be overwritten or altered, and ordered her off the premises. But it made my team deeply uncomfortable, so I've already transferred the log of her visit directly to the detective handling your case. You need to be very careful, Major. They aren't just trying to smooth things over anymore. They are actively trying to erase the baseline." I thanked Elena and ended the call, looking across the desk at Dana. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Travis and Judith were not begging because they were remorseful. They were terrified because they knew the full, unedited camera footage would completely dismantle the narrative of a mutual domestic disturbance. Every plea for reconciliation and every manufactured tear was nothing more than a stalling tactic designed to buy them time to destroy the physical proof. The sun dropped below the skyline of Tacoma, casting long, bruised shadows across the brick buildings outside the downtown office window. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and prepared to head back to Sarah's apartment to check on Avery, feeling the steady, unrelenting hum of an approaching confrontation beneath my skin. Just as I reached the heavy glass door of the law office, my phone vibrated in my pocket with a single, unannounced text message from an unfamiliar number that had been forwarded by Claire. It was a cropped screenshot from the private family chat group that Judith had managed for years, displaying a single sentence typed out in bold letters by Travis just hours before our birthday dinner. "One hit is all I need." The rain against Sarah's kitchen window sounded like dry gravel sliding down glass. I sat under the amber glow of the overhead lamp, staring at the screenshot Claire had forwarded from the private family group chat. Travis had typed those 5 words just hours before the birthday dinner, laying out a trap he thought nobody else would ever decode. My fingers traced the smooth edge of the phone screen while my jaw ached from clenching. For 16 years, I had treated every deployment, every logistics crisis, and every tactical obstacle as a puzzle with a predictable solution. Yet, looking at the digital evidence of my husband's premeditation, a cold fury settled behind my ribs, sharp and steady. An hour later, the front door clicked open and Claire stepped into the small hallway, shaking the rain droplets from her dark trench coat. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back into a loose clip, and dark circles bruised beneath her eyes. She did not bring her car right up to the building. She had parked 3 blocks away, checking her rearview mirror the entire time like someone being hunted. "You should not have come here alone, Claire," I said, standing up from the wooden chair without offering a welcoming smile. Claire dropped her leather purse onto the counter and pulled out a heavy gray flash drive, setting it down between us with a soft clack. She kept her hands planted flat on the laminate surface, refusing to meet my direct gaze. "My mother thinks I am at the grocery store," Claire said, her voice dropping into a shaky whisper. If she knew I was here, handing over the rest of the chat logs and the original screen recordings, she would disown me before the sun came up tomorrow. I crossed my arms, looking down at the small plastic drive that held the remaining pieces of a collapsing family structure. "You spent the last 4 days waiting to see which version of me would win, Claire," I said, letting the words land without pity. "You held your phone at that restaurant because Judith told you I might make a scene. That was cowardly." Claire flinched as if I had struck her across the face, but she did not defend herself. Her shoulders slumped under the heavy burden of her own complicity. "I know it was," Claire whispered, her chin trembling slightly. "I spent my whole life waiting for someone else to stand up to them so I wouldn't have to choose between being part of the family and being honest. But when Travis started sending out instructions on how everyone should frame the story to the police, I realized there wasn't a family left to save, only an audience for their performance." She slid the flash drive another inch toward me, signaling her surrender. The complete export from the family server was on that drive, including every message Judith sent, instructing the relatives on what to say if investigators started asking questions. One particular thread caught my attention immediately, hidden beneath layers of administrative permissions. Travis had spent the last several months systematically building an alternate digital reality about me, compiling a meticulous record designed to prove to any family court judge that I was an unstable, combat-fatigued soldier on the verge of a total psychological collapse. Through the formal discovery process initiated by Dana Brooks after Travis filed his initial emergency motions, our legal team received the complete index of documents my husband intended to use against me. The portfolio contained a private digital journal of fabricated incidents, selected text messages stripped completely of their context, and formal complaints regarding my military deployments that he claimed had left me detached from domestic life. As I scrolled through the document list on my laptop screen, with Dana sitting beside me in her downtown office the following morning, the depth of his preparation became glaringly apparent. "Look closely at the timestamps on these video files," Dana said, pointing a manicured finger at the glowing monitor. "Every single clip he submitted of you losing your temper begins precisely 2 seconds after an argument started. He never recorded the provocation. He only captured your reaction after he pushed you to the edge. I stared at the file names, remembering the quiet, isolated moments in our suburban house when Travis would deliberately pick a fight over trivial matters while standing just out of view of any potential witnesses. Once, during a bitter argument about household expenses, he had backed me into the pantry door until my shoulders bruised, whispering insults until I finally shoved past him and slammed the kitchen cabinet out of sheer frustration. That specific outburst had been recorded on his phone from an angle near the kitchen island. I had spent years minimizing those incidents, telling myself that every marriage had rough patches and that my own military discipline should be enough to absorb the friction without escalating into a full crisis. I gave him room to write the story first, I admitted quietly to Dana, my hands resting flat on the mahogany desk. I thought if I ignored the provocations, he would eventually run out of momentum. Dana did not offer empty platitudes or sugary comfort. She adjusted her glasses and met my gaze with clinical precision. "Then we start right where you are, Major," Dana said firmly. "Not where you wish you had started 5 years ago." He wanted a volatile opponent, so we will give the court a structured timeline instead of an emotional debate. Armed with that realization, I spent the rest of the afternoon building a master timeline across 3 distinct columns on my legal pad. The first column listed every claim Travis intended to present in his custody petition. The second column detailed the objective digital evidence we had secured to contradict each specific fabrication. The third column highlighted the remaining gaps that needed corroborating testimony before the upcoming temporary injunction hearing. I approached the task with the same methodical precision I used to plan supply routes through contested terrain during my final overseas tour. By evening, however, the legal battlefront expanded beyond the quiet confines of the law office and slammed directly into my domestic reality. Travis filed a formal emergency petition for sole custody of our daughter Avery, accompanied by a sworn affidavit declaring that I was a dangerous, highly trained military operative, prone to violent outbursts that threatened the safety of any civilian environment. To substantiate his claims, he attached a 12-second video clip extracted from the restaurant security archive, engineered to show me standing up abruptly from the dining table while Judith shrieked in the background, entirely omitting the initial moment when his hand grabbed my hair and yanked my head backward. The motion landed like a tactical strike designed to paralyze me with fear for my child. But as I sat in Sarah's living room, reading through the legal language of the petition, the panic I expected to feel never arrived. The anger was there, cold and focused, but it was anchored entirely by the knowledge that the unedited restaurant footage and Claire's original phone recording were already securely locked away in Dana's office safe. Travis had gambled everything on the belief that a short, heavily edited video clip would outweigh a lifetime of steady character and verifiable facts. He assumed my military background would automatically read as a liability in a civilian family court once he framed my restraint as aggression. But as I placed the printed petition back onto the coffee table and looked up toward the hallway where Avery was quietly doing her homework at the kitchen island, I knew the trap was about to spring inward on its own maker. The man who had spent months constructing a digital ghost of an abusive wife had failed to account for one fundamental variable. I was no longer fighting to save a broken marriage. I was simply waiting for the precise moment to let the unedited truth speak for itself. The heavy oak doors of the county family courtroom creaked open, admitting a thin slice of cold autumn air that did nothing to lower the oppressive humidity inside the gallery. I smoothed down the lapels of my dark blazer, adjusting to the quiet hum of whispered conversations and shuffling paperwork. Dana Brooks stood beside me, her briefcase resting on the edge of the mahogany table as she reviewed our indexed exhibits one last time. Across the aisle, Travis sat flanked by his private counsel, looking every bit the grieving, persecuted spouse with his shoulders slightly slumped and an expression of quiet suffering painted across his face. Beside him, Judith dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, occasionally casting sympathetic glances toward the bench, as if seeking divine validation for her performance. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, and Judge Harrison mounted the dais with measured steps, his graying hair catching the fluorescent glare above. He settled into his high-backed leather chair, scanned the preliminary motions, and immediately directed his attention to the emergency petition for temporary custody filed by my husband. Travis's attorney stood up, smoothing his tie with practiced smoothness, and launched into a theatrical opening statement that painted me as an unpredictable military operative whose long deployments and rigid discipline posed a clear and present danger to our young daughter Avery. He argued that the court needed to intervene immediately to protect a vulnerable father from a wife whose sudden violent impulses had finally broken through her civilian facade. To substantiate these claims, Travis's legal counsel requested permission to exhibit the primary piece of evidence attached to their emergency filing. The courtroom technician punched a series of commands into the digital console, and the courtroom projection screen flickered to life. The 12-second clip began to play with sudden, glaring clarity. On the overhead monitor, the scene opened, with the restaurant table bathed in warm candlelight, followed instantly by the sound of wooden chair legs scraping against the floor. The audience watched as I stood up abruptly from the booth, my posture stiff and my eyes wide with shock, while Travis stepped backward with his hands raised defensively. In the background, Judith could be heard shrieking in simulated terror about an unprovoked assault. The missing 30 seconds before my movement, the seconds containing the actual physical attack, the pulled hair, and the cruel whisper to come on, remained entirely absent from the screen. The edited loop ended right at the peak of my defensive reaction, looping seamlessly back to the beginning to maximize its manipulative impact. Judge Harrison leaned forward, resting his chin on his intertwined fingers as he watched the monitor with a practiced, neutral expression. Travis took the witness stand a moment later, answering his attorney's leading questions with a soft, trembling voice that conveyed deep psychological trauma. He swore under oath that he had done nothing more than attempt to calm me down after I allegedly began shouting obscenities over a trivial disagreement about family finances. He claimed he had been forced to restrain my wrists to keep me from launching across the table, portraying his defensive posture as a desperate act of self-preservation against a trained combat veteran. When Dana rose to cross-examine, her movements were calm and deliberate. She did not raise her voice or display outward hostility. Instead, she walked slowly toward the witness box, holding a single printed document containing the official transcript of Travis's initial deposition. "Mr. Cole," Dana began, her tone measured and clinical, "you stated for the record that this video clip represents the entirety of the incident from its initial moment, without interruption or digital manipulation. Is that correct?" Travis hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting toward his attorney before he locked his gaze back onto Dana. "Yes, that is correct," Travis said, his voice dropping an octave to sound more convincing. "That is the exact sequence of events as they unfolded at the table. My mother and my sister witnessed the entire thing." Dana did not challenge his statement immediately. She simply asked the court for permission to enter our comprehensive index of evidence into the provisional record, noting that while the complete restaurant security archive and the unedited phone recording from Claire were currently undergoing mandatory authentication protocols with the State Forensic Unit, they would be formally introduced at the primary evidentiary hearing scheduled for the following month. She explicitly reserved our right to present the full sequence of events once the digital chain of custody was officially verified by the court clerk. The judge nodded slowly, making a brief note on his legal pad before turning his attention to Judith, who was called to the stand next to corroborate her son's narrative. Judith took the oath with an air of profound martyrdom, adjusting her silk blouse before launching into a rehearsed monologue about my alleged volatility. She swore that I had consumed excessive alcohol during the dinner and that my behavior had grown increasingly erratic over the preceding months. When Dana asked her directly about the recorded cheering and the specific instruction that I needed to learn my place, Judith blinked in wide-eyed innocence and claimed she had no recollection of making any such statement amidst the general panic of the room. Dana did not press the point or attempt to introduce the voicemail left on Elena's office phone. She simply locked Judith's absolute denial into the official transcript and sat down with a quiet, confident grace that unnerved the witnesses on the opposite side of the aisle. When my turn came to take the witness stand, I moved with the steady discipline instilled in me by years of military service, keeping my posture upright and my responses concise. I stated my name, my rank, and my 16 years of logistics management within the armed forces, without arrogance or defensiveness. Under direct questioning from Dana, I admitted openly to sending a frustrated text message in the heat of the moment 4 days after the incident, taking full responsibility for my poor choice of words rather than attempting to hide my human flaws behind a manufactured persona. When Travis's attorney cross-examined me, attempting to trap me into admitting that my physical strength could easily overpower an unarmed civilian, I met his aggressive questioning with unshakable calm. "You are an Army major, trained in physical restraint and tactical defense, are you not?" Opposing counsel demanded, leaning heavily over the podium. "You could easily have incapacitated my client if you had chosen to use your military skills." "I possess the capability to defend myself," I answered, my voice steady and carrying clearly across the quiet courtroom. "But capability does not equal intent. The fact that I did not strike back when my hair was yanked backward is the ultimate proof that I was in complete control of my actions, whereas my husband's premeditated framing proves he was not." A murmur rippled through the gallery before Judge Harrison raised a hand to restore absolute silence. The judge reviewed the provisional findings for several minutes, weighing the immediate safety of our daughter against the conflicting affidavits submitted by both parties. "The court is not prepared to grant permanent or emergency custody modifications based on preliminary statements and incomplete digital files," Judge Harrison announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "However, given the verified police report, the initial medical documentation of physical trauma, and the clear discrepancies regarding the completeness of the video evidence presented today, I am issuing a balanced interim order. Avery will remain primarily in her mother's care at the current residence. The father will be granted supervised visitation through the County Family Center twice weekly, with strict instructions that neither party shall discuss the ongoing legal proceedings with the child. Furthermore, both legal teams are ordered to submit all unedited restaurant security logs and device metadata to the court-appointed forensic examiner within 14 days. The gavel came down with a sharp, echoing crack, signaling the end of the first major skirmish. I felt a cool wave of relief wash over me, though I knew the ruling was only a temporary fortification rather than a permanent victory. As we packed our files into our briefcases, I caught Travis staring at me from across the aisle, his face pale with sudden panic as he realized his 12-second video had failed to secure the immediate knockout punch he desperately needed. Outside the courtroom doors, the hallway was crowded with reporters and families waiting for afternoon hearings. Travis pushed past me with Judith close at his heels, his mouth twisting into a bitter sneer as he muttered under his breath that I had manipulated the system. I did not engage with his anger or allow myself the luxury of a triumphant smile. I simply adjusted the strap of my leather bag, knowing that the real battle would be fought not with emotional outbursts, but with the cold, unyielding architecture of digital truth that Dana was currently assembling behind the scenes. Later that evening, back in the quiet sanctuary of Sarah's apartment while Avery finished her school projects in the adjacent room, my phone buzzed against the coffee table. It was an urgent text message forwarded by Claire from her personal account, containing a screenshot of a frantic email Judith had just sent out to every extended relative in the family network, demanding that they stand firm and repeat the exact same fabricated timeline of events if investigators called them for questioning. I set the phone down on the wooden surface and walked over to the kitchen window, staring out at the rain-slicked asphalt of the parking lot below. The net was closing in around them, spun entirely from their own frantic efforts to bury a truth they could no longer outrun. The morning after the court hearing, the local neighborhood began to whisper in that quiet, toxic way, peculiar to suburban districts where people have too much time and too little empathy. Word had already spread through the PTA networks and the community groups that Travis had filed for an emergency separation, and the narrative floating from porch to porch was carefully curated by Judith. By midday, a civil colleague of Travis at the insurance firm posted a vague, self-righteous statement on social media about male domestic victims, subtly implying that a certain military wife in the district had abused her training to intimidate her own household. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages from acquaintances asking if I was all right, though their questions carried an unpleasant undercurrent of doubt, as if they were waiting for me to confirm the rumors of my instability. Even my military chain of command caught wind of the civilian fallout. My direct superior, a battalion commander who valued quiet competence above all else, called me into his office at the joint base just before noon. He did not look at me with anger, but his expression was weighed down by professional fatigue. "Major Cole," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, with his hands folded across his desk. "I received a notification from civilian counsel regarding an ongoing family dispute in Tacoma. The Army does not interfere in private domestic court matters unless a federal statute is violated, but I need you to understand that any public escalation will reflect poorly on the logistics corps. Keep your personal life out of the motor pool, and make sure your court dates do not conflict with your operational duties." "Yes, sir," I replied, maintaining a crisp, uniform posture. "The matter is being handled through civilian legal channels and will not impact my responsibilities." He dismissed me with a brief nod, leaving me to walk back out into the cool Washington air with my jaw tight. The rumors outside the gate were spreading faster than the legal system could process the truth, and for a terrifying moment, the temptation to fight back on their terms grew almost unbearable. A close friend from my service days called me that evening, suggesting that we put together a public statement or post the unedited restaurant footage online to shut down the gossips once and for all. "Megan, you cannot just sit back and let them drag your name through the mud while you wait for a slow court docket," she urged over the phone, her voice tight with indignation. "Just drop the real video on social media. Everyone will see what they did, and the lies will stop overnight." I almost agreed. The impulse to tear down Travis's facade with a single viral upload burned hot behind my ribs. But before I gave in, I remembered Dana Brooks's warning about protecting the integrity of the judicial process and keeping my daughter shielded from an online circus. If I released the footage publicly before the court authenticated it, Travis's defense team would immediately claim it was altered or illegally leaked to prejudice the jury pool, turning a clear legal victory into a messy public relations war that would inevitably drag Avery into the center of the storm. I chose discipline over immediate gratification, thanking my friend for her support and turning off my personal notifications for the rest of the night. While the community rumor mill churned, Elena was busy securing the administrative baseline back at the restaurant. 2 days after the hearing, Elena delivered a comprehensive affidavit and an official copy of the establishment phone records directly to Dana's office, bypassing the sluggish municipal bureaucracy. Along with the documents came a digital audio file containing a voicemail Judith had left on the restaurant manager office line 2 days after the birthday dinner. In the recording, Judith's voice was pitched high with a mixture of panic and aggressive entitlement, demanding to know if the primary security backups of the dining room cameras were stored locally or on an external cloud server, and whether a preliminary digital copy could accidentally be misplaced before the local police precinct served their formal evidence subpoena. Elena included a personal written statement confirming that she had never served me a single drop of alcohol during the birthday dinner, noting on the itemized receipt that my beverages consisted exclusively of sparkling water with lime and a decaf coffee. The receipt completely dismantled Judith's sworn court testimony, claiming I had been heavily intoxicated and out of control before the altercation began. The physical evidence was locking into place, piece by unbreakable piece, turning the fabricated timeline into a trap for its own creators. The web of manufactured lies began to unravel further when Claire forwarded a digital copy of an email Judith had blasted out to 20 different extended family members earlier that week. The message was formatted like a corporate crisis management memo, containing a rigid set of bullet points detailing the official family narrative. Megan had arrived intoxicated, initiated a violent verbal tirade, attempted to strike Travis, and forced him to physically restrain her for her own safety while Judith and Claire looked on in horror. One of our older aunts, a retired schoolteacher named Laura who lived 3 counties away, had replied directly to the group email with unexpected backbone. Laura wrote that she had attended family gatherings with me for over a decade and had never once seen me lose my temper or touch a drop of alcohol, adding bluntly that the story sounded entirely out of character and advising Judith to let the courts handle the matter without dragging the rest of the relatives into a coordinated deception. Judith had reacted to Laura's refusal with typical fury, immediately placing a frantic phone call to her sister to browbeat her back into submission. Fortunately, Laura had the presence of mind to let the call roll to voicemail, capturing every shrill, demanding second of Judith's pressure campaign. In the recording, Judith could be heard hissing that if Laura did not stand by Travis and support the family story, Avery would end up permanently in the hands of an unstable, dangerous mother who might flee the state at any moment. Laura saved the audio file, refused to delete it, and quietly forwarded the entire exchange to Claire, who in turn handed it over to our legal team. The fractures within the family network were no longer minor disagreements. They were turning into deep fault lines. Richard Cole, my silent father-in-law who had spent 6 decades letting his wife dictate every domestic and social movement, finally reached a breaking point. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Richard drove out to the modest apartment complex where I was staying, parking his old pickup truck near the back of the lot and walking up the exterior stairs, with his shoulders weighed down by a lifetime of quiet regret. I watched him approach through the vertical blinds and open the door before he could raise a trembling hand to knock. He looked older than his 66 years, his gray hair uncombed and his rain jacket soaked across the shoulders. "Megan," Richard said, his voice cracking slightly as he stepped over the threshold into the small, warm hallway. "I am not here to defend what happened, and I am not here to ask you to go easy on my son." "Take a seat, Richard," I said quietly, gesturing toward the kitchen table while offering him a dry mug of coffee. He sat down heavily, staring into the dark liquid without drinking. "Your mother-in-law has been sending out statements with my name attached to them, claiming I witnessed you strike Travis first," Richard confessed, shaking his head slowly in self-disgust. "She told me to sign an affidavit confirming their version of the events before the next court date. When I told her I would not sign something I knew was a lie, she told me I was abandoning my own blood. For years, I thought staying silent and letting her run the household kept the peace. I finally realized my silence didn't keep the peace at all. It just gave them permission to destroy everyone around them." "Did you tell that to Dana Brooks, Richard?" I asked, keeping my tone steady and devoid of false warmth. "I did," he answered, looking up to meet my eyes for the first time. "I called her office this morning. I told her that Travis grabbed your hair first, that you never threw a punch, and that Judith spent the whole dinner trying to provoke a reaction so they could capture it on camera. I told her she can put me on the witness stand whenever she is ready." He didn't wait for forgiveness or praise. He simply stood up, placed his empty mug back on the counter, and walked out into the rain, leaving behind a statement that stripped away the last remaining pillar of Travis's fabricated defense. Later that evening, after Avery had gone to sleep in the quiet back bedroom, my phone lit up with a secure notification from Dana's office. The forensic digital analysis of the 12-second clip Travis had submitted to the court was finally complete. The technical report did not rely on complex jargon or confusing computer code. It stated plainly in black and white that the video file was not an original, continuous recording captured live at the restaurant table. Someone had accessed a much longer foundational video file, clipped out precisely 12 seconds from the middle of the sequence, and exported it as a brand new digital asset on the morning following the birthday dinner. I stared at the screen, watching the amber light cast long shadows across the kitchen counter. Travis had not simply presented an out-of-context snippet of a domestic argument. He had manufactured a deliberate, calculated falsehood and submitted it under oath in a sworn legal proceeding to steal my child. The game of intimidation was over, and the trap he had spent months building to destroy me had finally locked shut around his own wrists. The first crack in Avery's protective emotional armor appeared on a rainy Tuesday evening following her second supervised visit with her father at the county family center. When I picked her up at the designated lobby, she slid into the passenger seat of my sedan, her small backpack clutched tightly across her chest, her gray eyes staring fixedly out the side window without the usual chatter about school or friends. I kept my expression neutral, driving us back toward the apartment through the slick Tacoma streets, while allowing the heavy silence to settle between us until we reached the quiet safety of the kitchen. After setting her school binder on the table, Avery turned to me, her small fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her jacket. "Mom, is it true that you tried to hurt Dad and that the police are going to take you away to a big building with iron bars?" she asked, her voice trembling with a quiet terror that made something cold snap behind my ribs. I set down the mug of tea I was holding, walked over to pull out the chair opposite her, and sat down so our eyes were level. I did not lash out, nor did I roll my eyes at the manipulative cruelty of the question. I kept my tone completely steady, reaching across the wood to take her small hands in mine. "Avery, look at me," I said, every word chosen with deliberate care. "Your father and I are going through a very difficult adult separation, and adults sometimes say things that are untrue when they are angry. I am not going anywhere. You are safe, and nothing in this world will ever separate you from me. You never have to worry about adult problems, because that is my job to handle." Avery let out a long, ragged breath, the rigid tension dissolving from her small shoulders as she leaned forward into my embrace. She didn't ask any more questions about the legal case that evening, but the damage inflicted by Travis's casual cruelty hung heavily in the air. I documented the conversation word for word in my private journal the moment she went to sleep, forwarding the details directly to our court-appointed family supervisor and Dana Brooks to ensure there was an immediate record of parental alienation in motion. The pressure from the opposing side took a different form by the end of that same week, shifting from emotional infiltration back to legal coercion. Travis's attorney dispatched a formal settlement proposal through the mail, offering a final custody and property agreement designed to look like a generous compromise. The terms stated that if I would agree to sign a joint declaration characterizing the restaurant incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding, drop all pending objections to the temporary protective order, and refrain from introducing the forensic evidence regarding the altered video file, Travis would graciously permit me to retain primary physical custody of Avery and award me a fair division of the marital equity. Dana called me into her office the following morning to review the document paragraph by paragraph, her pencil tapping a measured rhythm against the mahogany desk as she watched my reaction. "It is a very clean paper exit, Megan," Dana said, her voice dropping into a quiet, professional register. "If you sign this today, the litigation ends. the stress vanishes, and you can move into your townhouse without another month of court fees. I stared at the thick white pages covered in dense legal clauses, feeling the heavy temptation to simply take the easy way out and bury the ugliness for good. But as I read through the phrasing again, the trap became glaringly obvious. The agreement deliberately used ambiguous language that could later be reinterpreted to mean I had admitted fault or shared responsibility for the physical assault. Travis wanted that signature not to bring peace, but to preserve his narrative shield, leaving him free to use a modified version of the truth against me whenever it suited his convenience in the future. I pushed the document back across the desk toward Dana, shaking my head with absolute clarity. "We reject the settlement, Dana," I said, my voice level and unyielding. "I will negotiate a fair division of property and a stable parenting schedule, but I will not sign away the truth, and I will not let him write a lie into a court decree that my daughter might read someday." Dana gave me a rare, approving smile, sliding the rejection notice into her outbox without a moment of hesitation. "That was the exact answer I hoped you would give, Major," Dana said, pulling out our trial exhibits for the upcoming evidentiary hearing. "Now let us finish building the rest of the wall." The final evidentiary hearing loomed on the horizon like a well-mapped operational objective, and every piece of independent evidence had to be locked securely into position before we entered the courtroom. Dana Brooks spent the early part of the week reviewing our comprehensive exhibit binder, ensuring that every digital export, certified medical record, and independent witness deposition formed an unbroken chain of accountability. The preparation was grueling, requiring hours of meticulous cross-referencing to guarantee that opposing counsel could find no procedural loophole to exploit. Yet the most volatile variable in our tactical formation was not the legal paperwork, but Claire, who carried the heaviest personal burden of anyone connected to the opposing side. On a gray Thursday afternoon, Claire sat across from me in the quiet corner of a downtown cafe, her fingers wrapped tightly around a paper cup of lukewarm tea as she mentally rehearsed her upcoming testimony. Dana had subjected her to a brutal mock cross-examination the previous evening, forcing Claire to acknowledge every moment of hesitation, every instance of cowardly silence, and every initial assumption she had made about my military background during the birthday dinner. The process had left Claire in tears, but it had stripped away her defensive armor, transforming her from a hesitant bystander into a witness whose brutal honesty could withstand the most aggressive scrutiny from Travis's legal team. "I know they are going to tear me apart on the stand, Megan," Claire whispered, her voice cracking slightly as she stared down at the dark wood of the table. "They are going to tell everyone that I am a bitter sister turning against her own blood out of spite." "You are not testifying out of spite, Claire," I answered, keeping my tone steady and grounded. "You are testifying because you finally realized that keeping quiet to protect a toxic family dynamic only makes you an accomplice to the lie. If you stick strictly to what you saw and heard, nobody can break your narrative." Before her phone buzzed against the laminate surface with an incoming text message that made her recoil as if she had touched a live wire. The message was from Travis, sharp and commanding, ordering her to delete the family chat group immediately and telling her that if anyone from the court asked about the planning phase of the evening, she was simply to state that Judith had been joking around. A minute later, his phone call rang through, but Claire silenced the device with a decisive swipe and slid it face down across the table. "He called me a traitor just 10 minutes ago," Claire said, her jaw tightening with a sudden surge of resolve. "He told me that if I went through with this testimony, I would never be allowed to see Avery again, as if my niece was some kind of bargaining chip he owned." "You never have to trade your integrity for access to my daughter," I said, looking her straight in the eyes. "That manipulation ends right here." The pressure from Judith reached its chaotic climax later that same evening when my former mother-in-law summoned the entire extended family to her suburban home for an emergency gathering she grandly described as a session to get our stories straight. Claire attended the meeting strictly under the guidance of our legal team, keeping her phone fully charged in her pocket to log every instruction while ensuring no covert recording violated local statutes. Judith stood at the head of the dining room table like a general rallying a retreating battalion, barking out a rigid set of instructions that demanded every relative present sign a prepared affidavit confirming my alleged intoxication and aggressive demeanor at the restaurant. Aunt Laura, the retired school teacher who lived 3 counties away, stood up from her chair and flatly refused to sign the document, telling Judith directly that she would not commit perjury to cover up her grandson's violent temper. Richard Cole, sitting quietly near the back of the room, chimed in with a low, resolute voice that stunned the remaining relatives into absolute silence, announcing that he too refused to put his name to a lie. The carefully constructed illusion of a united family front fractured completely beneath the weight of Judith's aggressive demands, transforming a domestic loyalty test into a public unraveling of their entire collective deception. When Travis arrived at Claire's house later that night to confront her after learning she had refused to delete the family chat logs, the final mask of polite victimhood dropped away entirely. Claire stood in her own doorway, holding her ground against her older brother as he demanded to know why she was actively destroying the family name over a minor misunderstanding. "Why did you type that sentence in the group chat right before the party, Travis?" Claire asked, her voice steady and echoing clearly through the empty hallway. "Why did you write that one hit is all you need if you were just trying to celebrate a peaceful birthday dinner?" Travis stepped back, his face darkening with rage as he realized his own digital trail had permanently exposed his premeditation. "You have no idea what she put me through behind closed doors," Travis hissed, his voice dropping into a venomous Tacoma drawl. "She treated this house like a military barracks, and I had to do whatever it took to regain control of my own life. If you destroy me in court, you are destroying all of us." He turned on his heel and stormed down the walkway without waiting for an answer, having officially severed the last remaining family tie that might have offered him shelter from the storm he created. By the time Dana Brooks finalized our master evidentiary package on the Friday before the major trial date, our legal formation was airtight. The comprehensive dossier now contained the continuous restaurant security footage, Claire's original unedited phone video, complete with the ambient audio capturing the premeditated instigation, the digital forensic report proving the 12-second clip had been deliberately clipped and exported as a new file the following morning, the complete family group chat logs, the voicemail from Judith attempting to compromise the restaurant manager, the itemized beverage receipt proving I consumed 0 alcohol, the audio recording of Judith threatening Aunt Laura, and the signed witness depositions from Richard, Laura, Elena, and the independent restaurant employees. The public prosecutor's office contacted Dana that afternoon to confirm that they had formally reviewed the expanded digital package and were actively evaluating several criminal counts related to perjury and witness tampering against both Travis and Judith. Dana made it clear during our secure briefing that while the criminal investigation was proceeding along its own separate track, our immediate objective remained securing absolute victory in the civil divorce and custody proceedings to ensure Avery's permanent safety. I sat by the window in Sarah's apartment as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the floor, looking out over the quiet street while reviewing the final schedule for Monday morning. The anxiety that had plagued me during the first chaotic days following the assault was entirely gone, replaced by the cold, calm focus of an officer who had successfully completed a thorough reconnaissance and prepared every logistical line for the decisive engagement. The opposition had built their entire fortress out of edited clips, manufactured outrage, and absolute denial, assuming that no one would ever look past the surface of their performance. They did not understand that truth, once properly gathered and chronologically secured, requires no emotional shouting to make its presence felt. My phone hummed quietly against the coffee table, displaying a final administrative notification from the court clerk, confirming our exhibit numbers for the morning session. I picked up the device, silenced the ringer, and placed it face down on the wood. The preliminary skirmishes were over, and the final theater of accountability was ready for our arrival. By the time we returned for the final evidentiary hearing, Travis no longer looked like the confident victim he had portrayed at the first appearance. The complete restaurant footage had been authenticated. Claire had agreed to testify, and the court now had the report showing that his 12-second clip had been created the morning after the assault. Dana stood and addressed Judge Harrison without drama. "The petitioner asked this court to judge my client by 12 seconds, she said. Today, the court will see what happened before those 12 seconds, who arranged it, and what the petitioner did afterward to hide it." The courtroom screen came to life. Judge Harrison granted the request with a subtle nod, and the courtroom projection screen flickered to life. Dana did not start with my reaction. Instead, she bypassed the edited fragment entirely and commanded the technician to play the continuous, unedited security footage secured from the restaurant manager. On the overhead monitor, the camera angle captured the quiet dining room 30 seconds before the birthday cake arrived. The room was warm and softly lit, but the visual focus quickly locked onto Travis. Everyone in the courtroom watched as he carefully adjusted his seating position, glanced sharply toward the flower arrangement where Claire's phone was propped, and locked eyes with the hidden lens. The audio feed hummed to life through the courtroom speakers, carrying a clear, distinct whisper across the silent chamber. "Are you ready?" Travis asked softly into the open air. A moment later, the video showed him reaching across the table with sudden, calculated violence, grabbing my hair and yanking my head violently backward while Judith clapped her hands in gleeful approval, her voice ringing out clearly as she declared that I finally needed to learn my place. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the gallery benches. Travis slumped lower into his chair, his hands freezing instantly against the wooden table, as the inescapable proof of his orchestration filled the room. Dana did not pause to let the shock fade. She moved seamlessly to our second exhibit, calling Claire to the witness stand. Claire walked up the center aisle with unsteady steps, her face pale but her eyes fixed forward with grim determination. Under direct examination, she recounted the family meetings, the instructions issued by Judith, and the pressure Travis had applied to force her to delete the digital evidence. When opposing counsel stood up to cross-examine, he attempted to paint Claire as a disgruntled sibling seeking revenge over unrelated family grievances. He pressed her aggressively about her initial decision to hold the camera during the birthday dinner. Claire did not flinch, nor did she attempt to hide her past mistakes. "I filmed it because my mother told me Megan was going to make a scene," Claire answered, her voice ringing out clearly across the courtroom, addressing the judge directly rather than the hostile lawyer. "I kept the video because I was waiting to see which version of my family was real. I stayed silent for years because it was easier than telling the truth, but I am not lying today." The defense attorney stumbled over his next question, realizing too late that his aggressive line of questioning was only reinforcing the raw, unpolished credibility of the witness. He dismissed her abruptly, sitting down with a frustrated huff that earned a sharp glance from the bench. Dana then called the digital forensics expert who had analyzed the 12-second clip submitted in Travis's original emergency petition. The expert bypassed complex computer jargon, explaining the technical findings in plain, accessible language that anyone in the room could understand. "This video was not an original recording captured live at the table," the expert testified, pointing a laser pointer at the metadata timeline projected on the screen. "Someone accessed a much longer foundational video file on the family computer network, clipped precisely 12 seconds out of the middle sequence, and exported it as a brand new digital asset at 8 o'clock on the morning following the incident." The revelation landed with crushing finality. Travis had not simply presented an out-of-context argument. He had created a fraudulent file and submitted it under oath in a sworn legal proceeding. Judith looked away from the monitor, her face flushing with deep embarrassment and sudden, unadulterated panic as she realized her son's clever management strategy had completely disintegrated. To seal the evidentiary loop, Richard Cole took the witness stand next. He spoke in a low, exhausted tone, describing how Judith had drafted a rigid script of lies and demanded that every relative sign an affidavit supporting the fabrication. He admitted without hesitation that he had stayed silent at the restaurant out of a misguided desire to keep the peace, before looking directly across the room at his son and stating clearly that protecting Travis from accountability had only made him worse. When my turn came to testify, I stepped into the witness box with the calm, measured discipline that had carried me through 16 years of military logistics. I did not raise my voice, nor did I embellish a single detail. I walked the court through the events of the birthday dinner, my meeting with Dana weeks prior to prepare an orderly exit for my daughter, and the relentless stream of digital threats and alienation tactics that followed the assault. Opposing counsel attempted a half-hearted cross-examination, trying to suggest that my military training made me inherently prone to aggressive escalation. I met his gaze without a flicker of hesitation. Training teaches you how to recognize a threat and when to maintain absolute control, I answered, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. The fact that my husband grabbed my hair and I chose not to break his arm is the ultimate evidence of my self-discipline, whereas his manufactured video proves he was entirely focused on building a trap. Judge Harrison raised a hand to halt further questioning, his expression carved from stone as he reviewed the mountainous pile of verified exhibits. He did not need closing arguments to reach a conclusion. He adjusted his glasses, leaned back into his leather chair, and delivered his oral ruling from the bench with surgical precision. The court finds overwhelming and uncontroverted evidence of premeditation, digital fabrication, and coordinated witness tampering on the part of the petitioner, Judge Harrison announced, his voice echoing through the quiet courtroom. The emergency custody petition filed by Mr. Cole is dismissed with prejudice. Primary physical and legal custody of the minor child is awarded exclusively to the mother. Furthermore, all unedited security exhibits, forensic reports, and witness transcripts are being forwarded directly to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal evaluation regarding perjury and obstruction of justice. The gavel came down with a sharp, definitive crack that felt like the final release of a compressed spring. Travis slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, while his defense attorney rapidly gathered his papers into a leather portfolio. Judith stood up abruptly, her mouth opening to protest the ruling, but a sharp warning look from the courtroom bailiff forced her back into her seat in stony silence. I walked back down the aisle toward our table, collecting my briefcase with steady hands. Dana offered a rare, triumphant smile, whispering that the legal foundation we had built was completely impregnable. As we pushed through the double doors out into the sunlit corridor, Travis hurried up behind us, his voice cracking with desperate anger as he called out my name. He grabbed my arm, demanding that I stop and listen to him, screaming that I had ruined his entire life over a momentary lapse in judgment. I did not flinch, nor did I raise my fist or shout back in anger. I pulled my arm firmly out of his grasp, took 2 steps back, and looked him straight in the eyes. Pulling my hair was the assault, I said, my voice completely level and cold. Everything you did afterward was a decision. Before he could stammer a reply, 2 county sheriff deputies stepped out from the alcove near the elevators, their hands resting casually near their utility belts as they intercepted his path. Travis backed away, realizing that the system he had tried to manipulate was finally closing its doors around him. I turned my back on him for the last time, walking down the marble hallway toward the exit, where a quiet, orderly future with my daughter was waiting on the other side. Over the next several months following the courthouse dismissal, the legal machinery ground forward along 2 entirely separate tracks, separating the civil realities of our dissolved marriage from the expanding criminal investigation. Dana Brooks kept me informed of every procedural shift, guiding me through endless depositions and interviews with local prosecutors who were meticulously examining the digital trail left in the wake of the birthday dinner. The process was exhausting and entirely devoid of dramatic cinematic triumphs, requiring me to recount the events of that evening over and over again to detectives, investigators, and state attorneys who demanded absolute precision. There were days when the sheer repetition felt like a second punishment, but I kept my focus steady, knowing that every verified detail was another brick in a wall that could no longer be scaled by deceit or intimidation. Travis watched his carefully constructed network of alliances evaporate long before the criminal charges were formally filed. When he refused to withdraw his false statements or alter his narrative during the preliminary inquiries, Richard Cole finally cut off all financial support, refusing to pay another dollar of legal fees for a son who insisted on dragging the entire family through a manufactured catastrophe. Claire severed personal contact entirely, limiting her interactions with her brother strictly to legal necessities while slowly working to rebuild a fragile baseline of trust with me through brief, cautious check-ins. Aunt Laura made it clear to every remaining relative that she would never again attend a family meeting orchestrated by Judith, telling anyone who would listen that refusing to cover up a crime was the only honorable choice left for their generation. Travis did not lose his support system because I forced anyone to choose a side. He pushed everyone away by demanding they sacrifice their integrity to preserve his fragile ego. Judith made one final, desperate attempt to fracture my resolve. As the winter snow began to melt into the damp spring mud of the Pacific Northwest, she mailed a certified letter to my apartment, a long, rambling manuscript filled with wounded self-pity and conditional offers of forgiveness. She wrote that she was willing to overlook my stubborn defiance and welcome me back into the family fold if I would agree to sign a joint statement asking the prosecutor to drop all criminal proceedings against her son, even suggesting we could all gather for a family dinner once the legal storm had blown over. I did not open the letter with anger or tear it to shreds in a fit of passionate rage. I simply handed the unopened envelope directly to Dana Brooks, instructing her to file it with the court as an explicit violation of the ongoing contact restrictions. Judith still inhabited a distorted reality where she believed her authority as a matriarch could override state statutes and basic human decency, and she remained entirely blind to the fact that she was the primary architect of her own isolation. By early spring, when the cherry blossoms along the Tacoma boulevards began to bloom in soft pink clusters, the criminal case reached its definitive turning point. Faced with an overwhelming mountain of objective evidence, including the continuous restaurant security footage, the original unedited audio from Claire's phone, the metadata report proving the 12-second clip had been clipped and exported as a new file on the following morning, the deleted group chat logs, and the sworn testimony of multiple independent witnesses, Travis finally accepted a negotiated plea agreement. The resolution was structured precisely around the facts of the case, requiring him to plead guilty to domestic violence and a related charge acknowledging his deliberate attempt to manipulate physical evidence and obstruct justice during the preliminary custody hearings. The terms of the criminal plea were firm without crossing into unrealistic melodrama. Travis received a suspended prison sentence accompanied by 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory attendance in a rigorous state-certified batterer intervention program, and a comprehensive psychological evaluation to assess his impulse control and behavioral patterns. The criminal court issued a strict, permanent protective order prohibiting him from contacting me directly outside of designated legal channels or authorized parenting applications. Furthermore, the civil divorce decree incorporated a strict custody framework, granting me primary physical and legal custody of Avery, while restricting Travis to scheduled, supervised visitations at the county family center, with any future expansion of parenting time strictly conditioned upon his successful completion of counseling and demonstrated compliance with the court's behavioral mandates. He was also ordered to reimburse a substantial portion of my legal expenses incurred while defending against his fraudulent emergency filings. Judith faced her own legal reckoning a week after her son's plea hearing concluded. Rather than risk a public trial over her attempts to pressure witnesses and interfere with the restaurant evidence, Judith accepted a lesser plea to misdemeanor obstruction. The separate harassment allegations were addressed through the permanent no-contact order. Her sentence included 2 years of probation, mandatory community service, a permanent order prohibiting her from contacting me, and a strict legal injunction barring her from having any unsupervised or independent contact with my daughter. When she wept to the intake officer about how cruel it was to keep a grandmother away from her grandchild, she was firmly reminded that her access had not been severed by my hand, or out of a desire for revenge, but by the direct consequence of her own calculated efforts to weaponize a child against her mother. The quiet that settled over our lives after the final gavel fell was not a moment of cinematic celebration, but a profound, steady exhale. Richard Cole moved out of the suburban house he had shared with Judith for decades, renting a small apartment across town and beginning private counseling to unpack a lifetime of passive compliance. He sent me a brief, handwritten note that contained no excuses or requests for forgiveness, simply acknowledging that his silence had once protected the wrong people and thanking me for ensuring his granddaughter was kept safe. I placed his letter in the drawer alongside my service records, recognizing it not as a restored family bond but as a small step toward personal accountability. Claire and I met for coffee at a quiet outdoor bistro near the waterfront as the spring air turned warm with the promise of summer. We sat at a corner table under a striped umbrella, watching the ferries drift across the gray expanse of Puget Sound. We did not pretend that the past year had never happened, nor did we exchange easy platitudes about forgiveness washing away old scars. Claire admitted that she was still attending therapy to unlearn the reflexive fear of standing up to her mother, while I acknowledged that rebuilding a genuine friendship would require time, consistency, and unbroken honesty. It was a modest, realistic beginning, grounded in the hard-earned knowledge that trust cannot be demanded, but must be patiently constructed through action. Travis made one final attempt to reach through the barrier just days before the formal closing of our divorce settlement, forwarding a bitter message through his defense attorney, complaining that the entire judicial system had been unfairly stacked against him and predicting that Avery would eventually grow up to resent me for destroying their family. I read the words on my phone screen while sitting at the kitchen table in our new townhouse, feeling only a dull, distant pity for a man who remained entirely incapable of accepting responsibility for his own choices. I did not reply with an insult or a defensive argument. I simply forwarded the notification to our court-appointed family supervisor and deleted the message from my inbox, leaving him trapped inside the imaginary narrative he had spent a lifetime constructing. My phone chimed softly on the kitchen counter, cutting through the quiet afternoon shadows. It was a direct call from Dana Brooks, her professional voice carrying a brisk, satisfying warmth as she confirmed that the final paperwork for the dissolution of marriage and permanent custody orders had been officially stamped and filed by the county clerk. "Everything is locked in, Megan," Dana said, her tone carrying the quiet pride of a battle well fought. "The file is closed, the restrictions are permanent, and you and Avery have a completely clean slate." I thanked her, ending the call with a steady hand, and walked over to the open window that looked out over our new neighborhood. Avery was sitting on the grass in the small backyard, laughing as she tossed a tennis ball back and forth with a neighbor's golden retriever. The chaos of the past 10 months had tested every limit of my endurance, forcing me to confront the dangerous illusion that keeping silent and managing every crisis alone was a sign of true strength. I looked down at my hands, remembering the moment I had locked my wrists against the edge of that restaurant table to suppress my combat training, choosing discipline over a trap designed to destroy me. The victory did not belong to my military background, nor did it belong to luck or sudden miracles. It belonged to the cold, undeniable architecture of truth, carefully gathered, chronologically preserved, and allowed to speak for itself without a single wasted shout. The afternoon sun cast long, clean shadows across the hardwood floor of our new living room, catching the dust motes dancing in the warm air, as if time itself had finally decided to slow down and breathe. 10 months had slipped away since the chaotic night of the birthday dinner, transforming a life built on fragile compromises into a space defined by absolute clarity and hard-earned peace. I stood by the kitchen counter, unwrapping a small white bakery box, while listening to the soft murmur of television coming from the den where Avery was quietly finishing her homework project. The finality of the divorce decree and the permanent custody orders rested securely in the locked file cabinet in my study, serving not as trophies of a bitter war, but as architectural boundaries keeping our daily existence safe from intrusion. Avery wandered into the kitchen a few moments later, her school binder tucked under one arm and a curious expression resting in her gray eyes. She noticed the small box on the counter, and a bright, knowing smile spread across her face as she leaned over to inspect the white ribbon tied around the cardboard. "Is this the birthday cake we ordered, Mom?" Avery asked, her voice carrying a light, carefree melody that reminded me of how resilient children could be when their environment was finally anchored in truth. "It is, Avery," I answered, turning to meet her gaze with a reassuring warmth while untying the silver ribbon. "Just a small one this time, exactly the way you wanted." She helped me set a single white candle right in the center of the soft vanilla frosting, smoothing down the surface with a plastic spatula before stepping back to admire our work. When she asked if we were ready to light it and sing, I paused for a quiet second, letting my mind drift back across the vast expanse of the past year. During my 16 years in the Military Logistics Corps, I had foolishly believed that true discipline meant enduring every hardship in absolute silence, absorbing every blow without flinching, and trusting that emotional endurance alone would eventually fix a broken foundation. The ordeal with Travis and Judith had shattered that naive illusion entirely, teaching me a much harder, more valuable lesson about the true nature of strength. True discipline did not mean standing still while someone else tried to write a false narrative around your life. It meant recognizing the precise moment to walk away, preserving the objective facts with unyielding precision, and allowing the unedited truth to stand completely on its own. The front doorbell chimed softly through the open windows, breaking the quiet reverie of the afternoon. I walked over to the entryway, peered through the frosted glass panel, and saw Claire standing quietly on the front porch, holding a small, neatly wrapped gift bag. She wore a simple beige jacket, her posture carrying a tentative hesitation that spoke volumes about the fragile state of our reconstructed relationship. I unlocked the deadbolt, pulled the door open, and stepped back to give her space to enter. "Happy birthday, Megan," Claire said softly, stepping across the threshold and offering the gift bag with a quiet, genuine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know we still have a long way to go, but I wanted to drop this off before Avery's party gets started." "Thank you, Claire," I replied, accepting the small package while keeping my tone measured and kind. "Come inside for a few minutes if you like. Avery would love to see you." We stood in the entryway for a brief moment, two women connected by a shared history of cowardice and revelation, acknowledging that while forgiveness could never wipe away the past, honest actions could slowly build a new floor beneath our feet. Claire declined to stay for long, explaining that she needed to catch an evening shift, but the brief interaction carried none of the suffocating tension that had once defined every family gathering under Judith's roof. I watched her walk down the front walkway toward her car, realizing that rebuilding trust was very much like maintaining a delicate supply chain. It required consistent, daily effort, transparent communication, and an absolute refusal to let old cracks go unaddressed. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of deep indigo and amber, Avery and I sat together at the small wooden dining table. The single white candle flickered softly against the gathering darkness, casting a warm, steady glow across her smiling face. She struck a match, held the flame steady until the wick caught, and then blew out the small fire with a joyful laugh that echoed brightly through the empty spaces of our new home. As I cut a slice of the vanilla cake and handed it to my daughter, my phone rested silently face down on the kitchen counter, completely free of the desperate text messages and legal threats that had once haunted every waking hour. Travis had attempted one final, bitter communication through his probation officer weeks earlier, complaining that the system had treated him harshly and warning that Avery would one day hate me for dismantling their family. I had neither read the message with anger nor answered it with a retort. I had simply archived the notification and let the legal boundaries handle the noise. He was still trapped inside the fictional script he had spent a lifetime drafting, forever convinced that a clever lie possessed more power than an undeniable fact. He could keep his imaginary versions and his edited video clips, because the reality of our survival required no performance from the shadows. I smiled down at the table, running my fingers lightly over the smooth wood of the surface, anchored entirely by the quiet conviction of a choice that could never be reversed. Travis had pulled my hair because he desperately needed me to turn into the volatile, aggressive monster he had invented in his own mind. I had refused to strike back, choosing instead to execute a maneuver he never anticipated or planned for. I had simply made certain that the truth of what happened could never be edited away. When life pushes you to the absolute edge and hands you a script designed for your destruction, remember that your greatest power lies in your refusal to play the part they wrote for you. Throughout this journey, the most vital lesson we learn is that true strength is never measured by how loudly we can fight back or how fiercely we can match someone else's malice. True strength is found in the quiet, agonizing discipline of keeping your hands steady when every instinct tells you to strike, and in protecting your peace through unshakable facts rather than emotional explosions. Too often, toxic people and manipulative antagonists rely entirely on our predictable reactions. They push, they provoke, and they orchestrate chaos behind closed doors precisely because they are betting on the hope that we will lose our composure and hand them the very weapon they need to frame us. When you choose to pause, lock your wrists against the table, and secure the objective truth instead of feeding the fire, you completely disarm their entire strategy. Another lesson this story leaves behind is the sobering realization that silence in the face of abuse is never truly neutral. Whether it was Richard standing by with a lifetime of passive compliance, or Claire recording a moment she knew was wrong, we see how easily a family dynamic can become a co-conspirator to cruelty when people choose comfort over accountability. But redemption does not arrive through perfection. It begins the moment someone finally decides to stop lying, break the chain of complicity, and let the objective facts speak for themselves. Protecting your children, your boundaries, and your dignity does not require you to become loud or vengeful. It requires meticulous care, an absolute refusal to sign away your reality for a convenient shortcut, and the courage to let the evidence do the heavy lifting while you quietly build a clean slate. Have you ever found yourself trapped in a situation where someone tried to twist your reaction to make you look like the villain? And how did you manage to protect your truth when the whole world seemed ready to believe a lie?